Yes, obviously there's a problem for media. And I'll explain in the simplest, straightforward terms as a reporter. When you report from free democratic countries like this one and like Israel, you can say whatever you want. You really can say whatever you want. The Israeli court system has just imprisoned the former president of Israel, who was found guilty and convicted on a rape charge. He's just gone to prison. You can say, I can tell you anything you want in Israel, as you can in this country. I can say, and I do, anything I want about the Cameron Liberal Democrat coalition. I know that at no point is somebody going to come knocking at my door. I know that at no point am I going to be unable to report from Britain or unable to report from Israel. But, and I give you the example of an Arab-Israeli journalist, Khalid Abu-Tomin. It's not the same in the Palestinian areas, and it's not the same across the rest of that region. Khalid Abu-Tomin gave the example, just finished this recently, of a British journalist who was with him once in the West Bank, who had once in the 1980s written an article very critical of Arafat. The crowd in a cafe recognised him, somebody recognised him. The crowd started to gather, and Khalid Abu-Tomin had to get the British journalist out the back door to prevent a lynching. Now, the fact is, if you are reporting from totalitarian societies and totalitarian structures, yes, you are very careful about what you say, because you don't get back in. Sometimes you don't get out. If you're reporting from free states, I tell you, it's so much easier. And at the heart of that fact is the fact is the reason.
Discrimination against Arabs in Israel. Could you tell them about that?
I'm very happy to refute that when I have time.
I would like to Mr. McDonald, your response.
Yes. You know, Mr. Murray, the chap sitting next to me here, says that you can say what you like in Israel, they've got freedom of speech. Unless, of course, you tell the world that Israel has nuclear weapons, and then you get locked up in prison for the whole of your life. The question is,
is Israel misrepresented by news and media? Do you think that's
you heard from Sam and a little bit from Mr. Murray in relation to drawing analogies between, well, there was this killing here, but that wasn't reflected. There was Afghanistan there. There's what took place in Saudi Arabia there. It is easy to take things in isolation. But Israel and Palestine, as many of you here will know, is obviously an extremely complex situation that has been created over 50 years, probably longer. Many Palestinians would say much longer. It is a situation where suffering of the Palestinian people, and also, in some counts, the Israeli people, has been taking place over generations. It has been the catalyst for the creation of organisations across the world, Islamist organisations across the world, to use terrorism against other individuals. That is why our media, when something happens, says, look, it's happening again. It's happening again. How many times does the world have to say to Israel, you're doing it again? So is it being misrepresented? Well, just don't take it in isolation. Look at it in the context of history. In the context of history, this misery has been going on now for many, many years. Don't draw a simple analogy with another country that something took place last week. It is disingenuous. It is simply wrong.
Right, now we're going to open the floor for two speakers.
We're going to have two questions, one to the yes panel, one to the no panel, and unfortunately we can't have any more, but there'll be an opportunity to ask general questions at the end. So, would someone like to ask a question to Mr. Moe or Mr. Westbrook?
And I would just like to remind if you could keep your question specifically addressed to the topic.
To the topic with regards to media representation in Israel, and you're not don't go on too long with the questions. Okay, so anyone to this side? Okay, gentleman there.
With regards to the issue of when you say that there's a general attempted bias in the favour of the Palestinians in regards to media coverage in the West, just wonder how you can explain this point, considering that, if I remember correctly, in around 2001, that throughout the USA you found an attempt by various media organisations to try and prevent the footage from the attack in around 2001, showing Israeli troops, around 4 or 5 Israeli troops beating a child or a young man to death. Why there was an attempt to suppress that footage? Can you also explain why? Can you also explain why there is a general lack of reporting in the media about the couple of thousand Palestinian children who are in prison simply for throwing rocks at the wall, simply for throwing rocks at a wall which is being used to carve up their land?
Okay, so the question is, why is the Is that which one would you like to do?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by the 2001 case. I can think of one particular 2001 case that is rather an important example to give. Beginning of the Intifada, there was a picture at the front of the New York Times of what was captioned to be a Palestinian student, maybe 18, 19, covered in blood, an Israeli policeman holding a baton over him and grabbing him by the arm. There was outrage across the Western world from the media, again, all aimed against the brutality, what they saw as brutality of the Israeli regime. Probably a few days after, a professor at one of the New York universities, I believe, I'm not sure, wrote to say, "That's my son. He was a Jewish student." And there was not a single correction. The photo was verified, his claim was verified, it was indeed a Jewish student. Not a single correction, not one newspaper said a thing. So I'm not quite sure what you're referring to by the 2001 case, but I think that was the point.
I'd add one other one to that, maybe, which is the Mohammed al-Dura case. The press is very, very concerned about what it runs in its conflict. First of all, because it knows what strong emotions are whipped up around the world by the release of footage. The alleged murder of Mohammed al-Dura, a small Palestinian boy, was filmed by France 2 television. It was one of the things that spurred an intifada to occur. In a trial that finished in Paris only 2 years ago now, France 2 was shown to have messed up the footage, to have manipulated the footage, and it seems from the results of the trial in Paris that very many people died as a result of a piece of forged footage. So there are very good reasons why the press don't like to show certain things.
Thank you very much for the audience. Have you got a question for the no panel for Mr. McDonald and Mr. Habeeb, please? Okay, gentleman over there.
Yeah. In 2005, there was this engagement from Gaza where 10,000 settlers Jews were removed from Gaza. My question is, and obviously in the West Bank, they want all the settlements to leave as well. The question is, why in Israel are there 1.5 million Arabs with full citizenship and rights, while in the West Bank or Gaza or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else in the Arab world, no one Jew is able to live as a citizen?
Okay, sorry, go ahead. That's all right.
I'll answer it briefly. 8,000 settlers were taken from Gaza. There are 500,000 settlers living in the West Bank. Again, you have to take it into context of the ideological objective of Israel when it comes to Gaza and the attempts to isolate and to build what is effectively a siege of Israel, the no entrance siege of Gaza. That's why the settlers were removed, I would suggest. The 500,000 settlers are living on the land stolen from the Palestinians. It's under occupation, it's contrary to international law. The Israeli Arabs, or as I'd like to call them, the Palestinians who are living in Israel, And again, their identity was taken from them because it was forced to be taken from them to have identification cards which allowed them to live in their land. Their land, because that was the land that they were born in and generations had lived out to. It's their land. It's their home. It's where their families were born, it's where their fathers and their fathers' fathers were born. That's why they're entitled to live there. These people that have flown in from Russia and from Eastern Europe and from the United States, who don't even feel that their rights of Palestine should have a right to exist, are building, contrary to international law, on occupied land in the West Bank. 500,000 living in occupied territory.
There's also a million Jews who were expelled.
Okay, I've got you, so shall I jump in quickly? There's one point that I really need to touch upon, which is about the misrepresentation of the media. Have you heard of someone called Gilad Shalit? I'm sure everyone heard of it. But have you heard about the more than 7,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israel? Do you know their names? This shows how biased is the media. You know Gilad Shalit, one person, but you don't know more than 7,000 persons that have been in Israeli jails for some of them more than 30 years. No one of us know. This shows how biased is the media. What about Gaza 2005, the question? I've been in Gaza. I've spent all my life in Gaza. I came shortly 2 years ago after the war. I came here. I could tell you easily, and I could debate on the next question about this. There was no disengagement in 2005. I'm telling you. And I will debate Mr. Murray about this because I've seen something on BBC in August when he was even criticizing David Cameron when he said the prison camp of Gaza. Israel is, yes, they have pulled out of Gaza, they've taken all the citadels that were occupying Gaza, but yet they've continued to occupy Gaza. You control the sea, you control the air, you control the land. So how come you have disengaged from Gaza? How come you have left Gaza and you are taking control of all the border points? You are allowed every single commodity and every kind of food we get in Gaza should be processed by Israel. Israelis are the ones who tell us in Gaza since 2005 what kind of food we shall eat.
There's just so many mistakes coming up. It's sort of hard to know where to start. But look, quickly, first of all, of course, you didn't hear from the other side the fact that 40% of the population of Israel comes from Arab countries from which they're expelled or have to flee from the beginning of the state. You didn't hear about that.
Well, I had no chance. I wanted to answer that.
We've got such selective things coming. I'll say quickly on that. First of all, Gilad Shalit was kidnapped and is we don't even know where. We don't even know if he's still alive. We know that people who go through the legal process in Israel, that yes, people are imprisoned. Yes, as any state has the right to imprison people who threaten that state. Whether you have the right to go to another state's territory, kidnap people, and then keep them in hiding is another question. Obviously, you don't have the same problem with that. Just quickly on this thing about Gaza. Look, when Israel disengaged from Gaza, the Palestinians made a fatal error. They made the error of not taking the opportunity they had to show that they wanted to live in peace with Israel. Because the moment, and look, for those of us who want a peaceful solution to this, with a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, this is an important point to make. It's the single biggest stumbling block. When Israel, against the Israeli government, against the wishes of many of its people, traumatically for the country, forced people out of their own homes in the Gaza, they did so because they thought that if they gave the land up to the Palestinians, they would get peace. But they didn't. They got rockets. Hundreds and then thousands of rockets landing on Israeli territory. If the Palestinians in the Gaza had not fired those rockets, there would be no wall, there would be no blockade.
We're going to have to move on to the next discussion topic, so back to Monica.
Well, we already touched upon the second discussion topic, which focuses on can Israeli actions in Gaza and West Bank be justified? And I would like to direct this question to
In Gaza and the West Bank?
Yes.
Well, the simple answer is no, it can't. You know, I should start, and in a small way, I don't know if Mr. Murray was saying this in his opening remarks. Can I say this? I believe in the right of Israel to exist.